Hey everyone, welcome back to the shop. You know, during the 18th into the early 19th century, a very common feature of joinery type hand saws, saws with backs, was a canted saw plate. A canted saw blade is basically one that is wider at the heel than it is at the toe. So we get this gradual tapering effect from the heel to the toe like I have on my sash saw here. Around the time of the Civil War, or a little bit later, we start to see these canted saw plates disappear in favor of the easier to manufacture rectangular saw plates. Today, it's very rare to find old saws with canted saw plates, but modern saw makers like myself are starting to bring these style saws back. One thing that we do often find, however, is a saw like this. This is actually a saw from probably about the 1870s or so, maybe even a little bit later. This is a Richardson dovetail saw, probably from the late 1800s. And at first glance, it appears to actually have a canted saw plate. And I'll bring this a little closer so you can see. So the depth underneath the spine here is less at the toe than it is at the heel. And at first glance, it appears, oh, that's just a canted saw plate. But in fact, this is actually a saw with a rectangular saw plate where the spine has been knocked down. And this is actually improper for these saws. So how do we know, by looking at these saws, whether or not canting of the saw plate is there or not, and whether the back is just installed improperly? And if it is installed improperly, how do we go fix it? Well, let's take a look at a couple of saws first so we can see how we can identify if these, when a back is hammered down too low, like on this saw here. So here's a group of saws, okay? Here's that Richardson again, and you can see here how it appears to have that canting. This is my dovetail saw. This one does actually have a canted saw plate. Here again is my sash saw. Again, this one actually does have a canted saw plate, and I know because I built both of them. So what's the main difference between a saw like this that looks to have a canted saw plate but actually doesn't, and one that really does? For the answer to that question, the easiest thing to do is to look at a plate without a back. So here's one that I'm working on, a new saw. And we can see here how the saw plate is canted. So it's wider here at the heel than it is at the toe. If we look at the front and the back of the saw plate, the heel and the toe, we can see that they are square to this top edge here. Okay, so the canting goes from heel to toe. This angle here is not 90 degrees, and this angle here is not 90 degrees. The 90-degree angle is square to the back, so that when this blade gets a back put on it, and that back is installed properly and evenly across the whole saw blade, we will have less plate underneath the back at the toe than we will at the heel. For a better look at what happens on some of these older saws, let's take this one apart. So without the handle, we can really begin to see what's going on here. Okay, this angle here is square to the bottom of the plate, and it's also square to the top. That gives us indication that this is a rectangular plate. This is not a canted saw plate. And in fact, you can see here how the back has been knocked up here along the back edge, and has been knocked down here along the front edge. So in order to fix this and return this to the way it should be as a rectangular saw plate, we need to take this back off and then go ahead and reinstall it. So let's take a look at how to go ahead and do that. So what I have here is a machinist vise, and you really need something that can get a good grip on the saw. This is also something that you want to do before you go ahead and sharpen the saw. You want to fix this first. You really want to make sure you get a good grip on that. And we're just going to take a block and gently knock on the back of the on the saw back here. You want to be careful. These can actually be quite tricky to get off, especially some of the older saws. They could be rusted, and they could be on there pretty good. So just take your time, work at it. You may have to reposition this a few times, and just work at that back lightly, tapping with a hammer, and you'll eventually get it to pop off. With the back removed, it's clear to see that this is a rectangular saw plate, not a canted saw plate. So that's how we want to reinstall this back with the back actually installed evenly along here. So first, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean up the blade a little bit just to get some of this rust off, and then we'll go ahead and we'll put the back onto the saw plate. So you can really see here that the saw plate is in fact rectangular. I just cleaned it up a little bit with some steel wool and WD-40, and you can see the old line there where the back was installed properly, how much farther down it was driven on the toe as opposed to the heel. So we're going to go ahead and fix that and install the back properly before we sharpen this saw. I should mention that old saws are frequently found this way, with the back driven on a little farther at the toe than the heel. Frequently it's because the saw may have been dropped during its life at some point on the toe, and that maybe bumped the back down, or a previous owner tried to straighten out a bend in the saw plate by driving the back farther down onto the saw blade. In some cases, when we remove the back, we actually find that the saw plate is not straight and it does need straightening before we can sharpen it. In this case, I've got a really nice dead straight saw blade here, so I don't have to worry about hammering on this little plate. I can go ahead and reinstall the back and get right to sharpening it. Reinstalling the back is a fairly simple process. The hardest part is getting everything aligned with a back like this so that the hole in the back will line up with the hole in the handle. If you have a saw like my dovetail saw where both holes are through the plate, this isn't as difficult to do, and it's not as critical to get the alignment perfect. But we can always make minor adjustments later. So in order to get the saw back into the plate, we use a piece of pine, commonly referred to as a bat. And its use is exactly as its name suggests. We're actually going to hit the saw plate. And this can be a little tricky to get it started sometimes because you need to hold the blade and the back steady while you get it started with the piece of pine. So the trick I've found is to get a corner started. And sometimes this works better on the front, sometimes it works better on the back. I'm going to try it on the front because this plate, this saw blade, sticks past the end of the back. Okay, so I'm going to hold it and we're just going to give the blade a little tap. Okay, and we're going to get it started like that. And as we progress, we just want to use this piece of pine to reinstall that back. Now in this case, I want to be careful because I don't want to drive it too deep again. I'm just going to take a measurement just to see. So I've got about 1 7/8 inches of exposure there. and about 2 inches there. So we're going to give it a little tap at the toe. Not too much. Okay, that's about it. Now I need to, because this one has a bolt hole that goes through the spine, I need to make sure that I can get these two aligned. And it looks like I need to slide the plate forward a little bit. So let's talk about how to do that real quick. So I'm going to move back to the vise, and because I want to slide the plate this way or the back this way. So I want to hold the toe of the saw. And I'm going to want to drive that back slightly backwards. And the reason I'm trying to only hold the toe of the saw is because if I hold too much of the saw plate, it can buckle. And I don't want to buckle the plate inside the back. I want to keep the plate straight. By just grabbing the toe of the plate, sliding the back will tend to stretch the plate. Okay, those holes line up well. So let's make any final adjustments to the exposure. Okay, since these two holes are lining up well, I'm going to take the measurement back here. Okay, so I'm at almost 2 inches. About a 32nd shy of 2 inches. And I'm at about 2 inches there. I'm about a 32nd of an inch high here, but this saw blade needs to be jointed at least by that much, so I'm going to call that good. Give the blade a check just to make sure everything's still straight. That's it. Now we're ready for sharpening.